The hall was silent. Thousands of alien soldiers stood in formation, their armor gleaming under the pale light of their twin suns. At the center, raised above the crowd, stood Commander Veyran. His name carried weight across the galaxy. He was the war hero who had led victories against countless enemies, the warrior who never lost a campaign. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a shadow that none could understand. When he finally spoke, his words cut through the silence like a blade. "I have fought the fiercest of enemies," Veyran said, his voice deep and steady. "I have defeated predators that devour worlds. I've seen machines that think faster than armies, and I have broken their lines. I have faced beasts that tear through steel with their claws. But still," he paused, and every soldier leaned closer, waiting. "Even in victory, I fear humans more than any alien." A ripple of confusion spread through the hall. Soldiers shifted uneasily. Humans! To most of them, humans were only a minor species, a young race that had entered the stars far later than the great empires. They had fewer ships, less advanced weapons, and weaker bodies. How could their legendary commander say he feared them? Veyran's gaze swept over his soldiers. His expression was hard, but inside, his mind returned to memories he could not erase. He remembered the first time he had fought humans. His fleet had entered their system expecting an easy victory. The humans had only a fraction of the firepower. Logic had promised a swift war. But what followed was nothing the commander could explain with logic. "They do not fight like us," Veyran said slowly, each word heavy. "They do not fight like any race I have known. We march with discipline. We calculate risks. We withdraw when the battle is lost. Humans refuse to stop. Even when they are surrounded, even when they are outnumbered, they fight with a fire I cannot understand." The hall stayed quiet, but whispers grew in the back rows. Many thought the commander was exaggerating, perhaps speaking to inspire caution. Yet the weight in his tone told them he was not trying to impress them. He was telling a truth that haunted him. Veyran closed his eyes for a moment. A battlefield returned to him. He had seen human soldiers cornered on a broken plain. Their supplies had run out. Their armor was shattered. Any other species would have surrendered, or at least begged for mercy. The humans did neither. They laughed, they sang, and when the enemy advanced, they charged straight into the fight, knowing they would die. One soldier, bleeding and broken, had strapped explosives to his chest and ran toward Veyran's troops with a roar. The blast took dozens of soldiers with him. That soldier's face, twisted in pain and courage, still lived in Veyran's mind. "I do not fear their weapons," Veyran continued, his voice lower now. "I do not fear their technology. What I fear is their spirit. A human will fight even when hope is gone. A human will sacrifice himself if it means his people live. And when you destroy one of them, 10 more rise from his ashes." The crowd stirred, some nodding slowly, others frowning in disbelief. To many of them, humans were too small a power to matter. But those who had fought them once knew there was truth in their commander's words. Veyran lifted his hand, and the soldiers fell silent again. "You believe that victory means crushing fleets and burning cities. That is not true when you fight humans. Even when you win, you do not win. They fight in ways that plant fear in the hearts of their enemies. They turn defeat into legend. And legend is a weapon no fleet can destroy." He looked up toward the high ceiling, where banners of past victories hung in rows. Each banner told of a conquered world, a defeated enemy. Yet in Veyran's heart, those banners felt empty. He had won against humans too, but there was no pride in those victories. Only unease. "I stand before you as the most decorated warrior of our people," he said. "And still, when I dream, I see humans staring back at me. Their eyes do not hold fear. Their eyes hold something greater. A promise. A promise that even if you kill them, their kind will rise again, stronger than before." A hush spread across the hall. The words carried more weight than any medal on his chest. Soldiers exchanged looks. For the first time, some of them wondered if humanity was not a weak species at all, but something far more dangerous. Something that could not be measured by numbers or ships. Veyran leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard. "Remember this. If you ever face humans on the battlefield, do not take them lightly. Do not mock them. Do not believe they are broken when they fall. Because even in victory you will feel it, the shadow of their spirit. And it will terrify you more than any alien you have ever faced. The commander stepped back, his confession complete. His soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether to cheer, to fear, or to question their future wars. Outside the hall, the suns continued their slow climb across the sky, casting long shadows across the city. To Varen, those shadows looked like the silent march of humanity itself, always present, always growing, always ready to rise again. And deep inside, he knew the truth he would never escape. The galaxy could be conquered, the stars could be claimed, but humanity was not a people to be conquered. Humanity was a storm, and storms could never be defeated, only endured. The commander's words had left his people shaken, but he knew only one way to make them understand. He had to tell them the full story. And so he began to describe the first time he had faced humanity on the battlefield. It was many cycles ago, when the Council had ordered him to lead a fleet toward a small blue planet called Earth. At the time, humans were not considered important. Their fleet was small, their colonies were young, and their weapons were far behind the great empires. To the Council, the mission was nothing more than a test. Break them, they had said. Show the galaxy that resistance is useless. Varen had obeyed. He had marched into human space with confidence. His ships were vast, his armies endless, his weapons sharp enough to cut through planets. When the first human fleets appeared on his scanners, he felt no concern. They were smaller, weaker, and slower. His officers even laughed. Some placed bets on how quickly the humans would fall. But when the battle began, something strange happened. The humans did not fight as expected. They did not hold their ground like most species. They did not retreat in fear either. Instead, they split their forces, diving into the chaos like predators who understood every shadow. Small groups of human ships attacked from impossible angles. Others sacrificed themselves by ramming into alien cruisers, tearing them apart in explosions that shook the skies. Varen had watched with disbelief as humans used their own deaths as weapons. No other race did this. No other soldiers thought like this. To most species, survival was the first goal. But humans treated survival as a luxury. Victory came first. The commander paused, remembering that day. He could still see the glow of Earth's sun behind the flames of battle, the trails of destroyed ships falling like meteors across the sky. I underestimated them, Varen admitted to his soldiers in the hall. We all did. They fought with madness. They fought with courage. They fought as if losing was not an option. And for the first time in my career, I did not feel like a hunter. I felt like prey. The soldiers listening grew tense. The image of their legendary commander admitting weakness was something none of them had ever expected to hear. Varen's story continued. His fleet pushed harder, raining fire across the human lines. Slowly, piece by piece, the humans began to fall. Their ships burned, their colonies cracked under the weight of alien fire. But still, they did not yield. In one battle above a barren moon, a single human squadron of barely 10 ships faced his entire wing of 50. By logic, the fight should have ended in moments. Yet those 10 ships fought for hours. They moved like they shared one mind, each ship protecting the others, each pilot willing to die so another could strike. In the end, all 10 were destroyed, but not before taking down nearly 20 of his own. The commander clenched his fists as he spoke. They should have fled. They should have begged. But instead they fought until nothing was left. That is when I first felt it. Not respect, not admiration, fear. The kind of fear that gnaws at you because you realize you are not fighting a people who care about winning. You are fighting a people who only care about never stopping. He then spoke of one moment burned deepest into his memory. On the surface of a human colony, his soldiers had surrounded a group of defenders. They were cut off, injured, out of ammunition. By every law of war, they should have surrendered. But instead, one human, bleeding, broken, barely able to stand, walked out into the open with a small device strapped to his chest. He looked straight at Veyron's soldiers and smiled. Then he triggered the device, taking himself and dozens of enemies in a single blast. That smile, Veyron whispered, still haunted him. The hall was silent again. His soldiers' eyes were wide, their hands tightening on their weapons. Some could almost see the battlefield in their minds. The burning skies, the fearless humans, the commander standing there, not as a victor but as a witness to something terrifying. "They are different," Veyron said at last. "Other races fight to live. Humans fight to exist, even if it costs them their lives. That is why they are dangerous. You can break their bones, you can burn their cities, you can shatter their fleets, but you cannot break their will. And when you face a species like that, you never truly win. You only survive." He let the words hang in the air. Every soldier in the hall now understood why their commander's eyes carried shadows. He had not returned from Earth with only victory. He had returned with a memory that no medal could erase, for in that first contact, the galaxy's greatest warrior had discovered the one truth that terrified him. Humanity's strength was not in their ships, or their weapons, or their numbers. Humanity's strength was in something invisible, untouchable, unstoppable, their spirit, and that spirit was the greatest enemy he had ever faced. Commander Veyron's voice grew heavier as he moved deeper into his story. His soldiers stood frozen, listening as though the very air in the hall had turned to stone. What he spoke of now was not just war. It was something darker, something that clung to his thoughts long after the battles were done. He told them about a world far from Earth, a colony on the edge of human space. His army had landed there expecting an easy conquest. The colony was small, the human defenses few, and the population untrained. By all measures of war, it was already lost, but the humans refused to see it that way. Veyron described how his soldiers surrounded the last stronghold. Inside, only a few hundred human fighters remained, many of them wounded, some barely able to stand. They had no hope of reinforcement, no hope of survival. And yet, they fought. The first waves of his troops stormed the barricades, expecting a quick end. Instead, the humans answered with fire and fury. Their weapons were old, their armor cracked, but their spirit did not waver. They fought from the shadows, they fought from the rubble, they fought with their bare hands when their guns ran empty. Veyron's soldiers shouted warnings to one another as the humans kept coming. One of them, a young woman with blood running down her face, had nothing left but a broken blade. Still, she leapt at armored troops 3 times her size. She was struck down in moments, but not before driving that blade deep into her enemy's chest. "Do you understand?" Veyron asked the hall, his voice trembling not with weakness, but with the memory of something greater than himself. Even when they knew they could not win, they did not stop. They did not surrender. They did not beg. They fought as if each breath was worth more than life itself. The hall remained silent. His soldiers looked at one another, their expressions unsettled. He continued. As the battle dragged on, one of his officers had begged him to order a retreat. Not because the humans were stronger, but because their spirit was breaking the will of his own troops. "They will not stop, Commander," the officer had whispered. "They fight like death is a gift." Veyron had ignored the plea and pressed forward. The stronghold eventually fell. The humans were wiped out, every last defender gone. But in that silence, as smoke rose from the ruins, the commander felt no triumph. What he felt was emptiness and fear. For though the humans had died, they had died with smiles, with courage, with defiance. And that memory followed him more than any victory ever could. One face in particular haunted him. A human soldier lying on the ground, broken and bleeding. Veyron had watched as the man looked at his approaching enemies. Instead of fear, the human began to laugh. The sound echoed across the battlefield, wild and fearless. It was not the laugh of a man defeated. It was the laugh of a man who had already won something far greater. That laugh, Veyron told his soldiers, was worse than any weapon. It was a reminder that humans could never truly be conquered, no matter how many times they were struck down. The commander's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Their bodies can fall, their cities can burn, their fleets can break, but their spirit cannot be killed. It rises again and again, stronger than before. That is why I fear them, because I have seen what happens when an enemy refuses to die in the heart, even when the body is gone. The soldiers in the hall shifted uneasily. Some of them felt their chests tighten as they imagined facing such an enemy who smiled in defeat, who laughed at death, who turned every loss into a story of courage. Veyron looked down at his own hands. They were the hands of a victor, yet they did not feel like it. I have crushed armies twice the size of humanity's. I have erased civilizations from the stars, but none of them haunt me like the humans do. Because when I close my eyes, I still see them standing in the ruins, unbroken, unafraid, unstoppable. He raised his head, his gaze locking on the faces of his soldiers. You call me a hero. You call me a conqueror. But I tell you this, humans are the only enemy who ever made me question what victory even means. For when you fight them, you may destroy them, but you never defeat them. And that truth will haunt you long after the war is done. The silence in the hall grew colder. Every soldier there now carried a picture in their minds of that human defiance, the laughter, the courage, the refusal to bow. Some shivered as though a chill had passed through the room. Commander Veyron stepped back, his confession hanging in the air like a shadow that could not be lifted. For he knew that no matter how many times he spoke it, the truth would never lose its weight. The human spirit could not be broken, and that was what made them terrifying. The commander's voice carried across the great hall like a cold wind. His soldiers had listened in silence to the stories of humans who laughed at death and fought with broken blades. Yet still many of them did not fully understand. They were warriors of a proud empire. To them, fear was weakness, and victory was the only truth. But Veyron knew fear was not always weakness. Sometimes fear was a warning, one carved into his very soul. He stepped forward, his shadow long under the pale light. I have led armies to countless victories. But after facing humans, I learned a lesson no academy could teach, no council could prepare me for. A lesson in fear. The room tightened, every alien soldier leaning in. Veyron told them of another battle, one that had seemed already won. His fleet had surrounded a human transport convoy. There was no chance of escape. His officers reported that the humans would surrender soon. Yet when the commander scanned their signals, he saw no surrender. Instead, he saw humans preparing for something else. They were ready to die, he said. But not quietly. Not in despair. They prepared to take us with them. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The humans detonated their own cargo ships, creating massive firestorms that ripped through both fleets. In the chaos, smaller human vessels slipped through, carrying civilians to safety. The humans had destroyed their own ships, not as defeat but as strategy. Do you see? Veyron asked, his voice rising. They turned loss into victory. They made destruction into a weapon. This is why I fear them, because they do not measure survival like we do. For them, survival is not about living another day. It is about making sure their people, their spirit, continues. Even if it means death. He let the weight of those words sink in. The commander's eyes swept across his soldiers. He could see their confusion. He could see their pride resisting the truth. So he gave them another memory, one more terrible than the last. On a scorched battlefield, his troops had captured a group of human prisoners. Their weapons had been taken, their hands bound. By every law of war, they should have been harmless. But as the soldiers stood guard, one human began to whisper to the others. Slowly, the whispers grew into chants, then into songs. The sound was not of broken captives, but of defiance. Veyron's soldiers had grown unsettled. Some begged him to silence the humans, but he had not. He had listened, and in that moment he realized the truth. Even in chains, even in defeat, humans carried war in their voices. They fight with more than weapons, he told the hall, his tone grim. They fight with memory. They fight with song. They fight with hope that refuses to die. Kill their bodies, and you will still fear the echo of their spirit. The hall grew colder. Many soldiers now looked down, unable to meet their commander's eyes. Veyron raised his hand, his voice sharp again. "You call fear weakness? You are wrong. Fear can be a teacher, and humanity taught me what no victory could. They taught me that war is not about who holds the strongest fleet or the sharpest blade. War is about who refuses to break. And humans, they never break." He paused. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. His soldiers had fought many enemies, but none like this. None who turned death into victory. None who carried war in their laughter, in their songs, in their very existence. "They are not gods," Veyron said, his voice quieter now. "They bleed. They fall, they die. But what makes them dangerous is this. Each time one of them falls, another rises, stronger, fiercer, carrying the memory of the last. That is why they cannot be conquered. You may win the field. You may burn their world, but you will never erase them. And that is why I fear them more than any alien." The hall remained still, but the commander saw the unease spreading. His words were sinking deep, carving new doubts into hearts that had never doubted before. Past the stars themselves. "I tell you these things not to weaken you, but to prepare you. Because if the day comes again when you face humanity, you must understand the truth. Even in victory, you will feel it. Their presence, their spirit, their shadow over you, and it will follow you long after the battle is done." His voice fell to a whisper. "That is the lesson I bring to you, the lesson of fear. Fear not of their weapons. Fear not of their ships. Fear the one thing no power can kill, the human will." When he finished, the silence was so complete that even the air seemed afraid to move. The soldiers stood frozen, their minds filled with visions of human defiance, human sacrifice, human fire that no enemy could ever extinguish. And for the first time, many of them began to understand why their great commander carried shadows in his eyes. The great hall felt colder than before. Commander Veyron's words had carved silence into the hearts of his soldiers. His stories of human defiance, of laughter in the face of death, of songs sung in chains, had shaken them more than any enemy ever could. But he was not finished. There was one last truth he needed them to understand. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform, his shadow stretching across the assembled warriors. "You see me as a hero," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes dark with memory. "You see the banners of my victories. You see the stars I have claimed. Yet I tell you this, those banners mean nothing when I think of humanity. Because even in victory, I could never feel safe. Their shadow remained." He paused, scanning the crowd. "That is the final lesson. Humanity's shadow does not vanish. When the battle ends, it lingers. It spreads. It grows larger than the battlefield itself. And it follows you, even into silence." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Some stared at the ground. Others clenched their fists. The commander's words were not easy to carry, but they were true. Veyron told them of the end of the campaign. His fleets had forced human colonies to retreat. Entire worlds had fallen under alien control. The council celebrated him as a savior, a symbol of strength. Yet as he stood among cheering voices and endless medals, he felt no triumph. Because even in those victories, he saw humans in his mind, humans standing tall, refusing to bow, refusing to die quietly. "Do you know what it means?" he asked, his voice heavy. "To win a war and feel like the one who has lost?" The hall was silent. He continued, his voice dropping lower. "We burned their cities, we shattered their fleets, and yet their spirit survived. Within days, resistance rose. Small groups of humans struck from the shadows. Farmers became fighters. Children carried messages that moved armies. Entire villages disappeared into forests, only to return at night and bleed us dry. Even broken, even defeated, they found ways to fight again. That is humanity's greatest weapon. Not their ships, not their guns, but their refusal to accept an end." The soldiers whispered among themselves, unsettled. They had faced rebellions before, but none that sounded like this. Most enemies scattered once their armies fell. But humans were different. They carried war inside their hearts. Veyran raised his head, his eyes sharp. "This is why I tell you to fear them, not because of what they hold in their hands, but because of what they carry in their souls. When a human stands before you, you are not facing one soldier. You are facing an unbroken chain of voices, a memory of every battle they ever fought. That is why even in death they remain." The hall grew colder still. The commander stepped back, his voice now echoing like a vow. "I have seen the galaxy's monsters. I have destroyed machines older than our empire. I have faced creatures that turn whole armies into ash. None of them haunt me, only humanity does. Because humanity is not a foe you defeat. Humanity is a storm. It may fall silent, but it will return stronger each time. And when it returns, you will remember my words." He let the silence linger. Every soldier felt the weight of his warning. Some trembled, others clenched their jaws, but none could deny the truth they had heard. Then, with a voice like steel, he spoke the words that would be remembered long after the hall emptied. "One human is dangerous. 100 are deadly, but 1,000, united, are unstoppable. And if all of humanity ever rises as one, no empire, no fleet, no galaxy will stand against them." The words struck like thunder. For a moment, the soldiers were still, as though frozen in time. Then a murmur ran through them, fear, awe, and something else, respect. For even if they had never faced humans themselves, they now carried their commander's fear within their own hearts. Outside, the suns cast their light across the alien city, stretching shadows long and deep. Veyran looked out beyond the walls, toward the stars, and in those stars he no longer saw victory. He saw a shadow, vast, unending, eternal. The shadow of humanity. The commander's confession was complete. His soldiers would carry it into the future, a warning carved into memory. A warning that even the greatest victories could not silence the truth, that humanity's spirit could not be broken, that humanity's shadow could never be escaped, and that one day, when the galaxy least expected it, that shadow would rise again, and it would terrify them all.